If you think that the only Grand Canyons or gorges are in Arizona or in Yellowstone Park, you haven't looked closely at the gorges of North Carolina.
It's taken millions of years for Mother Nature to carve out this stone in the gorges of western North Carolina. But she's not finished yet, because these are still works in progress.
What is the difference between a canyon or gorge and a valley, and how are they formed? To find out, Exploring North Carolina asked two of North Carolina's best-known geologists, Tyler Clark, manager of the North Carolina Geological Survey, and Dr. Chris Tacker, curator of geology at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences.
The main difference between a valley and gorge would have to do with the steepness of the sides. A valley, typically smooth sides, gentle, rising from the bottom, going up the sides to the peaks on either side of the valley. A gorge, in contrary to that, would be very steep-walled, lots of cliffs, lots of inaccessible places, both having rivers flowing through the bottom of them, but accessibility or steepness being the main difference between a gorge and a valley.
You know, there are a lot of different features like valleys or gorges. You know, I wouldn't mind falling in a valley, but I wouldn't want to fall into a gorge. You know, it's strictly, they're both features that are made by erosion, but gorges, especially in North Carolina, are much more steep-sided and precipitous.
In some places you can feel and see the power of water as it carves and polishes. There is no better example of the carving power of water than the Linville River, gnawing away at the upper Linville Gorge. Today, we are going to visit different gorges of the Appalachian Escarpment and examine the geology, plants, and animals that make them worthy of special consideration. Before looking at specifics, let's look at some of the characteristics that make gorges unique. Let's start with the gorge that was my home for many years.
North Carolina has several spectacular gorges. The one behind me is Hickory Nut Gorge, just east of Asheville, North Carolina. All gorges are beautiful in the spring and summer when the wildflowers are out and the trees are fully green. But my favorite time in the gorges is in the winter, when the stones and the waterfalls can be seen in full glory.
Hickory Nut Gorge, just east of Asheville, drops 1,800 feet in less than 10 miles from the tiny village of Girton on the west end to Lake Lure on the east. It is the home of Bat Cave and Chimney Rock. Early pioneers and later stagecoach travelers heading west were awed by the extraordinary walls and rock formations carved by the Rocky Broad River and Hickory Creek. This gorge has everything: waterfalls, boulder fields, dome-shaped rocks, cliffs, bluffs, and fissure caves. Much of the gorge wall is made of gneiss, an exfoliating or splitting granitic rock. It is a metamorphic rock, estimated by some geologists to be 350 to 400 million years old. The walls also hold some rocks containing high levels of calcium and magnesium that buffer the soil and make it less acid. Hickory Nut Gorge is a geologist's paradise. The hickory nut is dramatic, but no gorge in eastern America is more breathtaking than Linville Gorge, often referred to as the Grand Canyon of the East.
Behind me is Linville Gorge, a work in progress. Mother Nature is carving her with a number of tools: a river, wind, water, ice, and plant roots. It is a magnificent creation.
The Linville River starts high on Grandfather Mountain and plunges 2,000 feet over 12 miles. The gorge rim averages 3,500 feet in altitude. Linville Gorge is protected under the National Wilderness Act and the North Carolina Wilderness Act. I know of no more rugged tract of land than Linville Gorge. Here you will see steep walls and dramatic cliffs, separated by impenetrable vegetation. Chris Tacker explained to me that geologically speaking, gorges are not very old.
The gorges in North Carolina are a relatively young feature. They're kind of an afterthought that's carved in there by water and by ice. And the carving process kind of varies depending on the rock that's underneath it. The water will cut through limestone fairly quickly, but through something like quartzite or granite, it'll cut through much more slowly.
At Linville Falls, you will see harder, erosion-resistant rocks that overlay softer, easily eroded limestone. As the softer rocks are eroded away, the hard layers above collapse under their own weight. As more stone erodes and collapses, the gorge continues to migrate to the north and west. Still a work in progress. On the east wall of Linville Gorge, known as Jonas Ridge, are two of my favorite mountain formations, Hawksbill and Table Rock. Both show the evidence of titanic geologic forces. If I had to list my top 5 scenic views in North Carolina, a breathtaking spot called Wiseman's View would be included. Wiseman's View is on the northwest rim, directly across the gorge from Table Rock. Before we give all the artistic and carving credit to the rivers, our geologist friends remind us that other forces are at work.
Another one of the tools that Mother Nature has in her arsenal for wearing down or creating gorges in North Carolina would be the freeze-thaw process. A little bit less dramatic than perhaps a raging river going through a gorge, but very powerful all the same. Water can seep down through the cracks and crevices in the rock, and in the wintertime when it freezes, the ice will expand and slowly push the rocks apart. This process over and over and over again will finally wedge large chunks off the side and create big rocky cliffs on the sides of the valley or gorge.
One of the features of granitic bodies is that they'll exfoliate sheets as they weather. And if you get a little bit of water in some of these cracks and it freezes and thaws, it just pries a whole sheet off of the side of the granite body. And you can form big caves, little caves this way, and then water takes advantage of it and sculpts it even further.
In all of our gorges there are cliffs and examples of the freeze-thaw cycle, but few are as dramatic as those in Hickory Nut Gorge, especially the fissure cave known as Bat Cave. Exfoliation caused a huge slab of granitic rock to slip and form the largest fissure cave in North America, 300 feet deep and 80 feet high. For sound ecological reasons, the cave, cared for by the North Carolina Nature Conservancy, is shown only on special tours. In addition to the cutting power of water and freeze-thaw cycle, plant roots help crack loose and pry away pieces of rock. To a lesser degree, plant roots are also among nature's gorge cutting tools.
In the walls of some of our gorges, you'll often find pockets of old-growth forest, poplar, pine, hemlock, and oak. These are huge trees, but the real beauty of these forests is the diverse ecosystems you'll find, among the finest in the Appalachians.
To find out more about plants growing in the gorges, I went to David Danley, botanist for Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina.
A gorge biologically is a little bit different if you define it through botany. A gorge has, of course, the steep sides, the water, but mainly what makes it unique to the flora and fauna is the high humidities and the amount of water, and sometimes the temperature differentials. The gorges in western North Carolina can vary tremendously. The ones on the southern end of the escarpment, the ones nearest the South Carolina border, that have the direct impact of the storms as they come in through the Caribbean, can have an extreme amount of rainfall. Over 100 inches of rain can be recorded there. The ones that are parallel to the Atlantic, on the other hand, for example, Linville Gorge, can have much less, around 50 inches a year. Of course, that differential really impacts the plants and animals in that area.
If you want to see the gorges with the most rainfall in the region, then you should visit Gorges State Park near Cashiers, North Carolina. An average of 100 inches of rain per year makes for spectacular waterfalls and vegetation, both in the park and at nearby Toxaway Falls and Whitewater Falls.
If you look at our gorges, you'll see a pattern in vegetation types. Starting, for example, with the Linville Gorge, you'll see that there's often find table mountain pine forests at the top that are fire adapted. Going down through the oak forest in the middle, and then winding up into the Piedmont type forests in the bottom of the gorge.
When I asked David Danley how many plants grow in and around our gorges, I was astounded by his answer.
We know that we have about 1,600 species of vascular plants, that is plants that like flowers, trees, shrubs, and ferns. And we have about 400 species of mosses. We also have about 100 species of liverworts. So that's about 2,100 species of plants that we know we have on the Pisgah National Forest. The gorges in western North Carolina represent a great opportunity to take a trail and see some of the typical plants and animals that we have in western mountains. There's a huge variety of plants and animals that you can see from the trails.
David is right. From March through October, life seems to spring from every crack and crevice in our gorges. To give you some idea of the floral treasures that await you, I walked familiar trails in and near Chimney Rock Park in Hickory Nut Gorge on a single day in May. This is what I saw. Most of the plants you are seeing are on the north-facing wall of Hickory Nut Gorge, which is cooler and more moist because of almost constant shade. It has a greater variety of flowers and plants. The south-facing gorge walls have drier soils and less humidity because of more direct sunlight. Linville Gorge is also home to a large and varied plant community due to differences in soil types, humidity, altitude, and temperatures. As a protected wilderness area where no motorized vehicles are allowed, It is also home to deer, bear, ruffed grouse, owls, and timber rattlers. When many people think of gorges, they think of recreation. All of North Carolina's gorges have hiking trails and several species of trout and other fish. Trail bikes are also popular on some side roads and trails. The most excitement, however, comes on a kayak or raft. And no gorge in North Carolina is more raft-friendly than the Nanty, or Nantahala Gorge, in the far western part of the state. The Nantahala Gorge is a 9-mile stretch of heavily forested beauty. I went to the Nantahala Outdoor Center, where guide and naturalist Stephen Hart forced me to take a raft trip before answering my questions about his favorite gorge. Stephen first told me that the waters in his river flow in another direction.
The Nantahala River is actually on the western side of the Eastern Continental Divide. And so what that means is that the water here in this river will eventually flow into the Tennessee River, which then flows into the Ohio River, and of course that winds up in the Mississippi River, and we all know that the Mississippi runs down to the Gulf of Mexico. A long time ago, one of the most fascinating things that has occurred to the Nantahala occurred just downstream of where we are now. And that's a situation called stream piracy or stream stealing, where a smaller tributary actually hijacked away the main part of the Nantahala River and took it in a different direction. The original direction was north-northwest. The new direction was basically east. And the river now makes almost a 180-degree bend in that spot and goes a different direction than its original path. All gorges are carved by rivers, and this gorge is no exception. This gorge, however, is a little younger because a lot of the rock in the gorge is limestone. And limestone, as we know, carves easier than other stones like granite.
Hart told me about the high rainfall averages in his gorge.
This area of western North Carolina, around the Nantahala National Forest, is very lush, and that's because the average amount of rainfall is exceedingly high, almost to the point where it's a temperate rainforest. One of the more fascinating plants in this area, and all over western North Carolina, is the giant cane, or Arundinaria gigantea. It's actually in the grass family, but is the only species of bamboo that's native to the United States. It has a lot of different uses, but as we all know, there are different parts of North Carolina called Caney Creek and Cane Fork, and that comes from the fact that this cane used to grow everywhere in and around bogs, wetlands, and creeks. One of the more interesting things about the giant cane is that it used to grow so abundantly that the settlers actually found it to be problematic getting through it. However, the Native American people used it for quite a few things. Examples are for food, you can eat the roots, as well as for structural building.
In the heavily forested areas along the rivers in our gorges, I saw evidence of flooding, but never great damage, and wondered why.
In recent years, there have been a number of hurricanes in the mountains of western North Carolina. Right where I'm standing, there would have been many feet of water coming through at tremendous velocity. If you look behind me, you'll see that the trees are still standing. They held the topsoil in place. There is a lesson to be learned here.
Few people can explain the dynamics of river flow and the importance of buffers better than Ron Linville, Habitat Conservation Coordinator for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission.
For example, in many areas of the mountains, you can find streams with natural buffers like the Linville River and other trout streams that we have in the mountains where the natural forested buffers are still intact. And when the hurricane struck, we had very little damage, but we had horrific flooding. And you would think that the floods would tear all the trees down. It didn't happen. Those streams are still intact. Where wooded vegetation has been removed from a stream, oftentimes people will come back and they'll plant grass, golf courses, nurseries, whatever, and you'll have a storm event to hit, and then the storm water comes in and it hits that bank, and it will undercut under the grass and then erode away tons of soil. And then that grass mat will fall down and then it will wash away. And this whole process is very unstable. And I guess the point I'd like to make here is that the root mass of trees is really the interstitial thing that holds it all together, holds it in place. And so what you've done when we take the root mass away from this stream, we've lost the cement, the glue.
Ron explained that buffers do much more than just hold soil in place.
Upstream forest and riparian buffers perform a lot of functions that protect this stream. Basically, when there's a rain event, they absorb the shock of the storm. They act as sponges. They filter pollution that comes into the ecosystem. They hold back sediment, and that's good for water quality. It's good for the aquatic life, and it basically helps to maintain the system intact and keeps it from being disrupted and becoming more sterile because of sediment. And even for the average homeowner who has a stream in his backyard, it's important that we either maintain or restore these stream buffers.
We hope you've enjoyed our tour of North Carolina's gorges, works in progress, and that you have a better understanding of the geologic and biological diversity they represent. As a side benefit, we hope you've learned about the benefits of forested buffers for all of us. Join us again soon for another adventure on exploring North Carolina.